The red wave didn't materialize this midterm election season. Why? Well, one of former President Trump's former White House advisor nailed the analysis on Sunday Morning Future.
So the red wave never materialized, and Republicans are coping and seething about it.
I guess the number one reason for that is Democrat mastery of mail-in balloting, vote harvesting, and the machinery of the early vote in these states where they're voting for weeks, if not months, before the election. Financial disparity between the Democrats and Republicans is still enormous. Number three is the need to win independent voters by seizing on winning wedge issues and fighting for them with every breath that you have.
And, obviously this is a disaster. It's a week after the election and we're still talking about it. The problem is that we are still voting, holding elections under this pandemic crisis mode where instead of election day, you have election week or election weeks.
We still say vote on election day. We don't fight for those early votes. We don't ballot harvest. We don't play the games that the Democrats play because we want to be self-righteous, but we keep losing because we're that self-righteous. So we're going to have to play the game.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack from this Fox News clip, but first and foremost, I want to touch on the fact that they are deeply upset, apparently, about the fact that they are not winning over independent voters, which is really, really hilarious because I think basically anybody could have predicted this. You see, it's deeply, deeply funny that these Republicans are complaining about not being able to win over independent voters when over the past few months they've focused almost all of their attention attacking queer people just for existing, trying to criminalize the existence of trans people, and by cheerleading the fact that they stripped away the right to an abortion. Now, I know this is going to come as a shock to the Republican Party, but threatening basic civil rights actually isn't popular, especially when people's primary concern right now is the economy. And a lot of right-wingers are really, really upset about this fact, but it's just fundamentally true. It turns out Republicans are really, really bad at dealing with economic issues. Now, the Democrats are also pretty bad at this too, but not to the same degree as Republicans are. You see, Republicans want to privatize everything, and we have seen over the past several years the result of privatization and how much of a disaster that is for our infrastructure and for education and other critical government services. It turns out that privatization actually really is terrible because the only thing that it does, think about it for a second, when you privatize something, by definition, you are only going to make it more expensive because all you are doing is introducing a profit incentive into that. And so, yeah, of course, if you run something in a profitable way, it is going to cost more, or they're going to be doing less maintenance or whatever. But then there's another point to this that's also really important. And you see a lot of Republicans getting really, really angry about early voting and absentee voting. And they're really torn between themselves because the Republicans can't seem to decide whether or not they want to focus their messaging on talking about how terrible absentee balloting is or how terrible early voting is, when the reality is we all know that it just makes voting more accessible and it makes it so that more people are capable of showing up, which fundamentally means that poor people and disabled people specifically will have an easier time voting, because people will have more opportunity to step away from their job or to show up to vote on their time off, and people have more time to find some sort of transportation, or people who are immunocompromised won't have to worry about showing up to a busy polling location. So fundamentally, more people who are disabled and more people who are working full-time jobs will actually be able to access the ballot box. And so Republicans are torn between that and the fact that because they've been messaging against it for so long and trying to demonize early voting, that a lot of Republicans aren't early voting because they don't want to or they don't trust it. And so Republicans really shot themselves in the foot by demonizing the electoral system and calling into question the electoral system entirely, so that a lot of Republicans have fundamentally lost a lot of faith in the electoral system, and they've lost a lot of faith in absentee votes and mail-in ballots. And so this is the position that the Republicans have put themselves in, where now they're trying to get people out to vote and get people to vote early and get people to vote absentee, but also at the same time trying to demonize it, and it turns out that they can't have their cake and eat it too. But what does this say, more generally speaking, about where the political system is? Well, fundamentally, it should give Democrats a lot more courage to actually stand up for abortion rights and to actually stand up for the rights of trans people. Because despite people like Hillary Clinton saying that trans rights aren't a winning issue for Democrats, fundamentally, most people just want everybody to be able to be left alone and live their life in peace, which actually, believe it or not, includes trans people. And most people are deeply alienated by the Republican Party's weird attacks and hyperfixation on the existence of trans people. But it also shows another point, and that point is the failure of the Democratic Party to fundamentally address economic issues. Fundamentally, the Democratic Party could just absolutely demolish if all they did was actually bother to spend real time focusing on the issues that working class people face. The only reason there are so many people that say that the Republican Party is better at the economy is because there's a lot of small business owners out there that really don't want to pay their workers more and are perfectly fine with like the deregulation of markets and decreasing corporate taxes and things like that. They themselves personally economically benefit, and so they like to paint the Republicans as being better for the economy. But there's not really much on the side of Democrats actually standing up for working class people. And because of that, voter turnout is kind of just suppressed because there's not really people that are championing working class issues. So all of this is to say that fundamentally, even Fox News is recognizing the fact that their weird culture war nonsense is really starting to bite themselves. But this is where the Democrats need to fundamentally step in and actually do their jobs and support the interests of working class people. And one thing that actually really proves this point is what this guy says right here.
It's hard for me to stomach Rick Scott pointing a finger at Mitch McConnell for the way he elaborated his strategy, which was to talk about how bad Democrats are. When Rick Scott put out a tax plan that no other Republican supported, that the Democrats were able to message saying that because Rick Scott is Republican leadership, it was the Republican tax plan.
You see, the only real tax plan that was put up by Republicans is one that was deeply biased in favor of big businesses. And we all know how that doesn't sell to the general voter, especially those independent voters who fundamentally want to see their interests put above the interests of giant corporations. And so Republicans can complain about voting, they complain about how election systems work and things like that, but fundamentally, at the end of the day, Republicans just do not want regular working class people to vote because they recognize that their policies are fundamentally unpopular and that the only thing that really keeps Republicans in office today is the extreme amount of gerrymandering, voter suppression, the unequal representation that exists in the Senate, and the fact that so many people are just completely disheartened about the voting system that they just don't turn out to vote because they don't think anybody is working for them. So if Democrats want to win, all they have to do is step it up, pass federal voting rights legislation to make sure that everybody has access to the ballot box, and actually do something to support working class people while not shying away from supporting critical civil rights like abortion and the right to exist as a queer person.